Everybody, it's Joe from HRTF, and yeah, I had to do a video on the Black Ops 6 audio engine because there's been a lot of talk about it with this whole pay-to-win thing with enhanced headphone mode. So I wanted to address that. I wanted to educate you all on what that actually means, how that affects the game, give you some game tuning tips, and also provide some custom EQ to take it another level, because it's not just about that one setting and if you even need it or not. So I'm going to start with that right off the bat. Is it pay-to-win? Absolutely not, because of a few reasons. One, it's a very little difference, and in some cases it actually made it worse and harder to track things. And two, the universal mode is free. So you can leverage the enhanced headphone mode without ever paying a dime. If you do want to pay for the custom one, you don't even have to right off the bat to try it. They gave you a pretty generous 30-day trial to at least see if there's any tangible benefits for you. And the reason why I wanted to confront this first is because you have to kind of understand what this is actually doing. And the way this app works is when you select it, you scan a QR code on the computer, or on your console's television screen, and it's going to open up on your phone and ask for permissions for the front camera. You look at the camera very close and you turn your head slowly to the side and back forward. It creates a virtual image of your head, and it kind of calculates a custom HRTF to tune the game to what it thinks will interact with your head better. Now, there's actually a few issues with that. So the first thing is, if it's scanning your pinna, or like the shape of your ear, which is basically like a fingerprint, that's how your ears interpret spatial cues in a room and in real life when you're walking around. It interacts with your ears in a certain way, and that's how your brain kind of recompiles this virtual audio space. The issue is, a lot of us game with IEMs, and if you're using an IEM, well, that's bypassing the pinna anyway. Then you have the whole thing of your ear canal being fairly unique, and that's called acoustic Z. And all of these things transfer, or at least affect, how we hear sound. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is we have different levels of hearing loss, left and right channel mismatch. You have high frequency roll off if you're getting older, or if you have damaged hearing, maybe you have tinnitus. All of those things will affect stuff. Then it also depends on which headphone or equipment you use. You might have something that's incredibly bass forward and lacks detail, or something that's incredibly sharp and bright in the treble and lacks a lot of bass. This whole thing is kind of like an educated guess based off of a lot of head models and calculations that they've done to enhance the sound profile. It may or may not work for you, but at least it's free to try. Now, to demonstrate the differences that happen with my particular setup and my ear scan, I wanted to use a Treyarch mix. I'm going to have just a basic person running from left and right. That's with the enhanced headphone off, and then we'll go to the universal mode and then the custom one. So this is one of those situations where the custom one actually did help a little bit in fixing the universal mode, because on my ears with my HRTF, it actually sounded like it was harder to pinpoint that it was in front of me. The universal one made things sound too side to side, and I had this experience a lot in game. I lacked a lot of depth perception for front and back. It was excellent for left and right, but the issue with anytime you deal with custom HRTFs is you have inconsistencies. And if you're playing at a high level, you expect audio cues to be in a very specific way. And anytime you go to these custom ones, well, that may not always happen. And this is where it caused the miscues. You have phasing and timing things that they impact. And I felt like the universal going to the custom one did push it back forward to me, but the stock mode without any enhanced headphone mode also pushed it forward. Now, the audio engine in the new Black Ops 6 is actually quite awesome. It's a noticeable improvement over older Call of Duties, and it's not just in terms of more consistent footsteps. That's definitely a big part, because a lot of people always want to know where the enemies are coming from. They got rid of the boots that made everyone dead silent. There's a ninja perk now, which greatly reduces the amount of noise you make. So there's going to always be this cat and mouse game of trying to hear people. They did improve how footsteps and other things interact with the environment, though. So if someone's walking down a hall and there's walls versus in the open, grass, dirt, wood, all of these materials have a much bigger impact on sound and the way you perceive footsteps, enemy cues, things like that. There's a couple terms I wanted to cover. One is called HRTF, which is head related transfer function, and another one is HPTF, which is headphone transfer function. The HPTF is something to consider because depending on what headphone you have or how it's interacting with your own head, there is another level of variability here. And this whole program from Embody and what they're doing with spatial audio, the same thing happens with Dolby Atmos and DTS. This HPTF can introduce variance. So consider the scan as an educated guess as how it thinks the transfer function will happen from your ears to the headphone. But again, if you're bypassing that, or if you have headphones that are kind of outside of the norm in terms of performance of what they expect for sound profiles, this will all have a huge impact on the results and how successful or unsuccessful it is. Now, in addition to that whole custom enhancement, whether you use it or not, there's a big thing called audio mix, and the audio mix affects greatly how you hear the game. If anything, this has a more consistent impact on what you hear and don't hear. The big takeaway from this particular mix is it mostly impacts dynamic range. Dynamic range is basically the quietest thing versus the loudest thing, and how much variance is there between it. So if you have a subtle brushing of the leaves, or, the wind is flowing and the environmental sounds are there, then all of a sudden someone fires a gunshot right next to you, or there's an airstrike, that wild variance of decibels is your dynamic range. And all of these mixes will have a varying impact on that. The headphones mix is pretty tempting, and if anything, it can be very effective, but a lot of it comes down to the game mode you're playing. If you're playing a game that has a lot of environmental sounds, or it's a very fast-paced, high-action game like traditional team deathmatch, then the Treyarch mix having a wider dynamic range helps reduce some of those other annoying noises, so footsteps can stand out a little bit more. Again, they did improve the audio engine here, so I'm really happy for that. If you switch to headphones mode, it does boost the environment sounds just a little bit, so even the background noise is now competing more with the cues you're hearing. Thankfully, footsteps are a little bit louder as well, but again, everything's packed a little bit tighter together. So depending on the distance or the situation, you might not have the same amount of depth perception as something with wider dynamic range. You have the obvious bass boost and bass cut. This is going to greatly depend on what device you're using. I talked about the whole headphone transfer function earlier. If you have a very bassy headset that's making things sound too muddy or too rumbly sounding because you're focusing on footsteps, switch to bass cut if you like the headphones mix. And conversely, if you have something that lacks any and all bass, maybe try the bass boost. In most situations, I didn't find that one helpful. Sucker Punch really tightens up dynamic range. I really didn't find a use case where I found it helpful. I basically bounce between the Treyarch mix and headphones. If you're playing Search and Destroy or a very quiet game mode, the headphone mix is pretty good, but I think the Treyarch mix is good enough. And to me, consistency is key, and you always want to know exactly where things are coming from, and that depth perception that you get from that mix, to me, helped the most. Aside from the outcry and people being upset about this whole pay-to-win thing, which again isn't really pay-to-win if you don't have a benefit from it, they are taking audio seriously beyond that, and this is a huge win for people who have hearing issues as well, but there are some things you can benefit from whether you have hearing issues or not. There's something called configure frequency intensity and asymmetrical hearing compensation. This is such an amazing feature because some people have tinnitus maybe in one ear, or the right or left ear hears certain frequencies less than the others. Well, I am pleased to say that you can now accommodate that to basically balance it out. So if your right ear hears 1000 hertz, several decibels quieter than the left, you can boost and shift things up and down to make up for it. So I do want to point this out. You have to turn this on in order for the frequency intensity to work. So think of this as almost like a a Band-Aid EQ. Once you click on it, you have left channel and right channel. So they are not linked. You have to configure this separately. You don't get all bands. It would have been really cool if they addressed, 120 hertz because of the whole footsteps thing, or sub bass to get like a full EQ. But this is still a pretty awesome feat to have. Now, I purchased an RME DAC, a pretty high-end DAC for a lot of measurements because I'm measuring a lot of audio equipment. And I captured this audio source to address or at least understand how much of a difference these variables make. So I have to warn you, if you are going to adjust this, turn your volume down very low because these tones are louder than I would have preferred. I think if some people have the gain turned up and they hover over 6 or 8K, you could have hearing damage as a result, which is kind of counterintuitive to what they're trying to address here, but keep your volume down, hover over it, and you're going to hear a tone played on one or, whatever ear you have selected. Now, again, I said I measured this, and just to show you, there's a variable of minus 50 to plus 50. And when I hooked it up to my DAC, I was getting minus 4 decibels at minus 50 and plus 4 decibels at plus 50. So you do have an 8 decibel swing for each frequency that they provide here. And it's linear as well. So when I went to 25 or minus 25, that was minus 2 decibels, for example. So when you have the left and right considered, you have quite a big range of adjustment you can do because you can always balance things out accordingly. This is really beneficial because if you have a PlayStation and you do not have a PlayStation headset, for example, let's say you hooked up IEMs to a controller. Well, this is going to give you an ability to do some form of custom EQ on PlayStation without having to purchase an external DAC. If you don't have driver mismatch issues, Xbox, or I should say ear mismatch or damage or hearing loss, on the Xbox side, you have the Dolby Atmos app, which is a reasonable price, and that gives you a full 10-band EQ that addresses both channels simultaneously. So Xbox users have always had some form of software EQ. This is just a nice benefit to consider if you're a PlayStation player. Of course, on PC, you can use this as well, as can Xbox, but on the PC and Xbox, you just have better equalizer solutions out there. Now, a couple tips before we jump over into custom EQ. On the audio section, if you click show more and you expand this down, I strongly suggest reducing gameplay music volume to 0 because that is going to help, again, reduce other noises that you may not be as concerned with. It can be fun if you like more of the immersive casual play, but if you're playing competitively, the less noise that are competing with audio cues you care about, the better. Dialogue volume, the voice is constantly talking in this game, and sometimes that overpowers what you're actually trying to hear again, so I greatly reduce mine. Effects is basically the same as master volume. That's all the stuff you care about. Cinematic is pretty self-explanatory. Just like some other previous Call of Duties, you have reduced tinnitus sound. You want to turn this on pretty much all the time because it's that ringing effect from a stun grenade, and frankly, I don't really see a benefit to ever being able to hear that. So always reduce that to, again, reduce listening fatigue and hearing damage. Now, a side note for anyone using a controller as well, they reset the dead zone inputs for me, and it was quite high. It was set to 15, even though I had the beta and obviously prior Call of Duties. It didn't import any of those settings, so make sure you go to dead zone inputs, expand that, and set your right zone to as little as possible. Click test, and then see if it sits at 0. And if it sits at 0 with essentially 0 dead zone, that's going to give you the best possible precision you can get. All right, so let's talk about custom EQ. Now, there's no such thing as one generic EQ profile to rule them all. The reason being is this headphone sounds very different than these IEMs, and a lot of other gaming headsets out there have wildly different sound profiles. So you can't just say drop the bass here and boost treble here on every single product because you're going to get wildly different results. Now, this game engine is a bit different than the older Call of Duties. They put so much work into spatial audio cues, which is Dolby Atmos compatible and Sony's Tempest 3D. But what's important to consider when you have spatial audio as such a main factor for imaging and this whole HRTF thing, you have things to consider called fundamental tones and then second and third harmonics. And a simple form is the game engine expects some sort of smooth connection from different frequencies to each other. If you have a reverb effect and there's the initial fundamental tone and then the reverb hitting a wall, there needs to be some level of similar amplitude and clarity because you don't want that tone to be drastically lower. You lose the effect of the reverb if those frequencies are reduced. So with this particular game, having a smoother sound profile, I don't want to say Harman exactly because I have my own custom version of this, but having something that has less jagged ups and downs and all of that is going to give you better imaging performance. And I've spent a lot of time testing this, and the results are quite wild. Even on 500 to $2,000 headphones, I got an improvement by doing these custom EQs. So this website is called Squiglink. This is my page on it. I have a ton of different headsets, and my game target is on this particular site. If you've used my site before and you don't see the target, which will be here next to gaming targets, it's not live yet, so I had to upload it. But if you're missing it on yours, just refresh the browser, maybe clear cache for the site, and the target will eventually show up. For those of you new, thank you for watching the video, and I'm going to explain how this all works. So this dotted line represents the ideal sound target for any particular audio device that I've measured on my rig. We talked about the whole pinna thing earlier and how we hear things uniquely. Well, this is to help translate that into something you would hear and hopefully like as well. Now, I mentioned that the game has a totally revamped HRTF or audio engine, and this still works with the whole enhanced headphones mode, by the way. I'm just going to make your headphones or IEMs sound better, in my opinion. It's trial by fire, so make sure that you fine-tune it to your own liking, but this generally represents an ideal target curve for how I think the audio should sound from the game, to have a faithful reproduction of the game, still be immersive enough, but still give you a competitive edge. And this works for everybody because you can use custom EQ in the actual game now a little bit. But if you have a DAC that has a 10 band, Dolby Atmos, or you can do full parametric EQ, which gives you insane amount of power, I'm going to show you how to use that as well. Now, the reason why it's important to understand why you want to use this is because, again, not every headset sounds the same. So if I click on the Drop PC38X, which is widely regarded as one of the best sounding gaming headsets you can buy for gaming, it's an open back. Look how nice that sound signature is. It's very smooth, which means there's no huge dips in the sound curve where things are missing or recessed or pushed back. That really helps with accurately tracking where an enemy is or other important game cues in the game. If you have a HyperX Cloud Alpha, and I'm not doing this to roast you, but I want to show you the train wreck that is the Cloud Alpha. It has insane amount of bass, a huge dip in the 1.5 kilohertz area, and a couple wonderful little spikes of treble just to, get right through your eardrum. It's not a good sound signature for FPS gaming at all. So what I want to do is show you how simple it is to fix this. So if you click gaming targets and you select the Black Ops one and we go to equalizer on the top left-hand corner, now we choose which model I want to EQ. So if I clicked the Drop PC38X and I hit auto EQ, well, this site is going to generate the custom EQ that you need to fine-tune the Drop PC38X. So I'm going to hide this. Now the blue line represents that same Drop PC38X that you have, and these are the parameters you would provide in your custom EQ software. Now, this is parametric EQ, which means I'm adjusting how wide or narrow I'm adjusting the sound. I have a whole video on how this works to further explain it, so I'll have a link in the description for that. That'll help give you a good understanding of what EQ actually does. If you're familiar with it, then copy these settings directly into Sonar. You can build your own custom presets for all your audio products by typing it in. So let's say you're happy with this EQ and you want to take advantage of this new blue line to make your PC38X sound like that. Well, all I have to do on the left-hand side is click Export, and this is going to give me a text file. So I'm going to call this PC38X B06, and I'm going to save that to my desktop. Then I'm going to open Piece, which is buried. Here we go. And I'm going to hit import, which is right here. You can see that little tiny folder icon. So I'm going to click import. Then we have the Drop PC38X file that I just created. I'm going to hit open. It's going to ask if you're replacing your current one. Yes, because I don't need that one. And there we go. All of my variables are now imported. Now, by default, this website will reduce your preamp up at the top, which does reduce volume a little bit. It's to help make sure you don't have any distortion in case you boost certain frequencies too high. In most cases, it's more aggressive than it needs to be. I like to bring it closer to like -2, -3, unless I see something that's just way off on how much higher I'm boosting something. The reason being is if you're testing it in-game and you toggle it on and off, at least for the testing side, you can turn equalizer APO on and off by this switch while you're playing the game. You can even program a shortcut on your keyboard, and that will allow you to hear the difference of the tune pre and post. Once you're happy with that, if you do need to cut it back because you're worried about distortion or over boosting certain frequencies, you want to make sure you're not clipping. That is the quick setting for that. So there are more things I want to explain to leverage this. Now, you saw how simple that adjustment was. If I bring this guy back up, we're going to get rid of the Drop PC38X. Here's that alpha again. Oh boy, I'm going to hit auto EQ. and we're going to try to salvage it. Now, surprisingly, thanks to Parametric EQ, we can totally transform that headset. This is amazing because you can have some pretty off-sounding things, and it's going to bring you much closer to the audio performance of more expensive products. So let's say you don't have access to Parametric EQ because you're playing on console, or you want to use the built-in stuff that's on the actual Call of Duty game. Well, I want to show you how to replicate this to clone what your 10-band equalizer is. And if you look at the Dolby Atmos app, you have these 10 bands. You have 32, 64, 125, etc. So what we have to do is type these in manually. Yes, I know it's a little bit of work, but it will be worth it. So we're going to type these in here under frequency and fill all fields. So now that I've done that, the other thing to address is something called the Q factor. And I'll quickly show you what this actually means and why it's important to type this number in. So you want to type 1.41 on every single Q factor. So I just copied and pasted to save some time here. So let's fill this in. And now I have successfully cloned basically what the Dolby Access app is giving me for options. Let's turn Sound Virtualizer off. So when I want to adjust this, if I just do -5 or -6, let's say, you can see the impact that it has on the bass. Now, the HyperX is not the best example because this thing is pretty poorly tuned. It's one of the worst sounding wireless headsets I've used, so probably not the best example, but you could see on the Dolby Access app, you can go all the way down to -12, which is great. So we have some flexibility here. So if I do -12, you can see how we're getting much closer to the target curve. For 64 hertz, I'm going to do -3. That's getting closer. 125 could even be, let's say, -2. Just want to see how close we can get it. Oops. 250 hertz -1 maybe. Let's try -2. So we're kind of massaging the sound curve to get much closer to the target. It's never going to be perfect. That's the difference of a 10-band EQ versus parametric, but we are certainly getting there already. If I go to 1000 hertz, I go to 4, and look how much closer we're already getting. 2000, I'm going to try 1. 3000 is a little bit of a peak. So the problem is if I boost 4K by 4, look what happens. It also lifts that peak. That's the whole Q thing. If you have the ability to do parametric EQ, instead of 1.41, if I were to type 5, do you see the difference how it made this really narrow? And if I type 0.4, the whole thing is getting lifted because the Q factor is wider. So we're going to go back to 1.41 because, again, this is what a 10-band is going to give you, and that's what even in the Dolby game or the Call of Duty game itself allows you to do. I'm going to set this back to 0, and this is not perfect, but I think if you look at the sound signature of this, and let's see, that's at 8K, so we can pull that down just a little bit more. Now look at the green line compared to the blue one and how wildly different that is. And this is using stuff that is available partially in game minus this deep bass. That's the one downside of Call of Duty is you can't do anything below 250 hertz. So all this stuff still would have had a lot of bass. But I was still able to fill in this EQ because, as you recall, if you are using Call of Duty to adjust it, you get up to 4 decibels of lift at each frequency. So for this headset, it benefits from going all the way to 50 on the Call of Duty app. But now that I have all of these sliders, I can go to Dolby Atmos and I can clone those values, at least as close as possible with the slider, to replicate it. And now you've transformed your gaming product or headphone, whatever it is, to a closer to ideal sound signature. Now, just in case you have an IEM that's not on my Squig link, which is likely, it's very possible because I haven't measured a ton of IEMs, I wanted to show you another person's site. And all you have to do is when you go to my Squig link, if you click the drop down, click on SuperReview or any others. But the reason why I picked SuperReview is, one, he hosts Squig link for myself and other reviewers. He's an awesome guy. He also has a YouTube channel, so I'll link him in the description below. And he's measured a ton. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. You can either export my target. So if we go to the game target, which you want to do it from the IEM section, you click download at the bottom for the target, and you can see I already saved it here. Black Ops 6 target, let's just delete that one. I'm going to hit save. Then I go to his Squig link website, and I can go to equalizer, click upload target. That's important because you want the auto EQ to work. Click the target. And now I have my target imported. So it'll look a little bit different for the IEM one later because the measurements will vary slightly. But here's my target with his IEM. I can then click Auto EQ and export his Auto EQ file. Conversely, if you have this IEM, let's say you browse his wonderful list of IEMs and you want to import it, I can click on Moondrop, click on the download button here for that particular IEM, save the measurement to my computer. Then I would go over to my page, click on Equalizer, hit Upload FR, click on his IEM that I exported, hit Open, and there's his. And if you select my target or any other target, you can see there's several ones here. I could then select it, hit Auto EQ, and once again, we have the whole parametric thing, or you can build your own. All right, so I know that was a lot to cover. Again, I don't want to do anything that's pay to win myself. I believe that everyone should have the best chance of playing and enjoying the game. And the good news is, I think this game is a nice improvement over older Call of Duties when it comes to audio. It's a lot more consistent. There's a lot more clarity in the game. The interactions with things in the world, like occlusion, reverbs if you're going down a hall versus an open area. I just love a lot of the improvements they made. Use these tools. I really hope it helps. I don't think personally it was worth me purchasing the enhanced mode. It did have some tangible benefits. However, the issue when you get into these is there's inconsistencies. If you're a very competitive player or skilled enough to use audio to your advantage, then the issue I have with some of these custom HRTF solutions is it's not always consistent. This enhanced headphones mode will sometimes have footsteps come in sooner, and sometimes it is like laser accurate, and it does give you an advantage. I'm not disputing that. The problem is sometimes the placement of these audio cues is a little off because of how it's interpreting the game engine and the whole HRTF, HPTF, and how it interacts with your particular ears. This variance can lead to some inconsistencies of where audio cues are exactly coming from, occasionally causing you to look slightly the wrong way because you thought it was just a little off. I had issues where it was producing things that sounded more like it was to my farther left and right, and I lost some of the depth I got forward and back. So again, depending on how you play and how it interacts with your ears, your mileage may vary. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions on this, and I promise I will do my best to answer in the comments below. If you're technically minded, keep an eye on this video as well, because if it gets beyond my ability to answer, I would love to have everyone have the best possible experience they can get. I also have a Discord server that's open for chat, and there'll be a dedicated Black Ops 6 channel for the time being to help alleviate and address any questions on this whole setup. So with that being said, if you found this helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see it in some future videos, and I hope this helps you get the most out of your game. With that being said, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.